Hi, my name is Emma Hart, 23 years old, born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. After 4 years of studying through tears and sweat, juggling classes and part-time jobs, I finally graduated in data science from Northeastern University. My graduation day should have been the moment I was honored in front of my family, with my parents smiling proudly and my younger sister handing me flowers. Instead, as I sat in the wide auditorium, the 3 seats reserved for my family remained empty. Not a single person showed up. I tried to convince myself that maybe they were stuck in traffic, that perhaps there was some surprise waiting for me. But the moment I stepped onto the stage, my phone vibrated inside my gown. The screen lit up with a notification. My mother had just posted a photo with my sister Chloe, both beaming on a luxury yacht in the Caribbean, captioned with the words, "So proud of our baby girl." That was the moment my heart shattered. The most important day of my life had been abandoned, replaced by my sister's vacation. If it were you, would you be able to endure such injustice? Tell me where you are listening to this story from, so I know I am not truly alone. Since childhood, I was always seen as the responsible eldest daughter, while Chloe, 3 years younger, was treated as the delicate princess. Outsiders might think my parents were fair, but anyone who lived under that roof for just a few days would notice the stark difference in affection. From the moment Chloe could barely walk, my mother called her the baby of the family, while I became the older sister who must sacrifice. Those words repeated like a chant, turning into an unspoken rule everyone silently obeyed. I remember vividly one afternoon when I turned 8 years old. My mother bought a small cake from the corner bakery, placed it quickly on the kitchen table, and said, "Emma is grown up now, let's keep things simple, no need to be extravagant." I forced a smile, blew out the candles, and said thank you, telling myself that adults must have their reasons. But just a few months later, when Chloe's 5th birthday arrived, the house transformed into a festival. My parents hired a small band, invited all the neighbors, rented out a decorated restaurant filled with balloons and a giant backdrop. I sat quietly in the corner with a slice of cake in my hand, chewing slowly as I wondered. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough to deserve a special day like that. That question lingered in my mind, growing heavier with each passing year, until it became a silent wound I carried within me. Chloe was always praised, always encouraged, even when she did nothing particularly special. Once, when she scribbled random lines on a piece of paper that looked like nothing at all, my mother hugged it to her chest and exclaimed, "You're so creative, truly an artistic genius." I brought my mother an essay that my teachers had praised in class, and she glanced at it for a few seconds before setting it aside, reminding me, "Don't brag too much. It might make your sister feel sad." When I earned a state scholarship, my father simply said, "Good, but don't speak too loudly about it. You're supposed to be good, but your sister needs extra support." Each of those words felt like a needle piercing my young heart, deflating every bit of joy the moment it rose. From a young age, I learned to hide my achievements so as not to hurt my sister's feelings. When teachers asked why I never brought my certificates home to show my family, I just smiled and said I left them at school. When friends asked if my parents were proud of me, I lied and told them they were too busy with work to show it. Deep inside, I repeated to myself, "I'm the eldest, I must sacrifice." But many nights lying awake in my room, I couldn't help but wonder, do I really need to try harder just to be acknowledged? Or is it all meaningless, because no matter how well I do, Chloe will always be the center of their world? There were moments when the injustice was so sharp it hurt. One time Chloe broke an expensive glass vase in the living room. I wasn't even there, but when my parents came home, my mother immediately scolded me. "You're the older sister, why didn't you watch her carefully?" I stood stunned, wanting to defend myself, but my father's stern eyes silenced me. Chloe stood behind them, pouting as if she were about to cry. Instantly, they rushed to embrace her, soothing her with, "It's okay, it's just a vase, don't be upset." I stood there, carrying the blame while watching that tender scene unfold, and deep inside, the feeling burned that I was nothing more than an outsider in my own family. The breaking point came the summer I turned 12. My school organized a science camp for the most outstanding students, and I was one of the few selected. I rushed home with the invitation letter in my hand, eager to show my parents, hoping this time they would truly be proud of me. But my father only sighed and said, "You should think about staying home to help your mother more. If you go, who will tutor Chloe?" I fell silent, crushing the invitation in my fist. Just a few weeks later, Chloe was chosen to play the spring fairy in a children's play at her school, and the entire family came along to watch. My parents filmed her, took photos, and filled Facebook with glowing captions. And me? I was once again the shadow in the background, watching my sister's radiant smile and wondering when it would ever be my turn. Those experiences etched themselves into my mind like invisible scars. Slowly, I stopped expecting fairness from my parents. Instead, I poured every ounce of my energy into studying, treating achievements as my only way of proving my worth, even though I knew deep down there would never be a hug or a congratulatory word waiting for me at the end of the journey. But how could I stop trying? If I gave up, who would I become? I was terrified that if I didn't keep excelling, I would disappear entirely from my family's sight, swallowed whole by the glow they always reserved for Chloe. The true turning point came when I received my college acceptance letter. I had been admitted into the data science program at Northeastern University with a partial scholarship. The moment I read the word congratulations, I trembled with happiness. It was the result of years of burying myself in books, of after-school study sessions, of relentless effort to escape the shadow of my family. But the joy quickly dimmed under a harsh reality. The scholarship only covered half of my tuition. The rest, housing, books, insurance, and hundreds of smaller expenses, would all fall on me. I brought the letter home, hoping my parents might offer encouragement or advice. Instead, my father simply nodded, his tone flat. "Good, but now it's time for you to learn how to take responsibility. College is where you grow up." My mother added, "At least you have a scholarship, that's better than most people." I stayed quiet, but inside, I knew the road ahead was going to be anything but easy. From the very first week of college, I was already juggling jobs. At 5 in the morning, while the city of Boston was still half asleep, I pulled on my uniform and pushed open the door of a small cafe on Huntington Avenue. The work was anything but easy. Pulling endless shots of espresso for the rushing stream of customers, wiping down tables, and even enduring the baseless complaints of irritable strangers. As soon as my shift ended, I rushed to change into my student gown and sprinted to make it to class by 9. In the afternoons, I tutored high school students in math and English, trying to pass on patience and passion, two things I felt myself slowly losing. On weekends, when my classmates went out for meals or joined club activities, I sat in my cramped dorm room, typing away to create content for an educational website just to earn a little extra. Some days my schedule was so full I forgot to eat. One winter morning, during a data theory lecture, my head spun. My vision blurred, the professor's voice faded into a distant hum. Seconds later, I collapsed at my desk. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the school's health office, sweat pouring down my face. The nurse leaned toward me and asked, "Do you want to call your family?" In that moment of weakness, I nodded. I dialed my mother, my voice trembling. "I just fainted in class. I feel so exhausted." On the other end, she was silent for a few seconds before answering flatly. "Don't exaggerate, Emma. You're strong. You should know how to take care of yourself." Not a word of concern, not even a promise to visit. I froze, my throat tight with a lump I couldn't swallow. When the call ended, all I had left was the cold, empty health office and the drone of the air conditioner buzzing above me. While I scraped together every dollar, eating instant noodles instead of real meals, the news about Chloe only made the injustice more unbearable. She failed her college entrance exams at home, but instead of accepting reality, my parents managed to send her to Florence, Italy, to study art at a private academy. The tuition alone cost tens of thousands of dollars each year, not to mention the living expenses in one of the most expensive tourist cities in Europe. My parents called it an investment in her future. Every month, they wired her money, adding a spending allowance so you can enjoy your youth. I could hardly believe it, especially since only weeks earlier, when I asked my father for an extra $200 to buy programming books, he brushed me off, saying, "Figure it out yourself. You're smart, you'll find a way." I still remember one night, typing furiously on my laptop until 2 in the morning to meet a writing deadline, when I opened my phone and saw Chloe's latest post. She was wearing a silk dress, standing in front of a cathedral in Florence with the night sky glittering behind her. Her caption, written in pretentious English, read, "Thanks Mom and Dad for making my dreams come true. Living my best life in Florence." Beneath it were hundreds of likes, friends praising her, calling her a European princess. I stared at that photo, my fingers trembling slightly. While I split a boiled egg into my ramen for dinner, my sister was sipping Italian wine and flaunting an artistic dream bought with my parents' money. The injustice was so stark it made it hard for me to breathe. But what hurt me most wasn't the money or the lifestyle. What I longed for was recognition, a word of care, or at the very least, a simple congratulations. I had done everything to keep myself from breaking, to survive the crushing weight of tuition and endless work. Yet in my parents' eyes, I was only the independent child, the one who needed no help, no affection. And it was during those years that I began to realize the strength they attributed to me was nothing more than an excuse to abandon me. There were nights when I sat alone in my rented room, the yellow light casting shadows on the peeling walls, and I asked myself, if I weren't so capable, if I weren't so hardworking, would they love me more? Or have I never had a place in their hearts at all? The answer never came. All I knew was that the alarm would ring at 4:45 the next morning, and I would repeat the cycle again: wake early, work, attend classes, tutor students, write articles for hire. I lived like a machine, except that every night, my heart still bled with the sting of abandonment. Chloe and Florence kept posting pictures, and I kept enduring. Two parallel worlds seemed to exist. On one side, the extravagant dream cushioned by my parents' money. On the other, a girl scraping by, learning to survive while being forgotten. And I knew that sooner or later, that injustice would become a wound inside me that could never fully heal. Everything came to a head during my 5th semester, when I faced a tuition bill larger than usual because I had to register for extra credits to graduate on time. My partial scholarship covered only half, and the rest far exceeded the meager savings I had managed from months of working at the cafe and tutoring. I tried everything, picking up more shifts, taking on extra students, even staying up all night to finish low-paid writing projects. But despite stretching every dollar, when the payment deadline arrived, I was still more than $10,000 short. That sum felt like a mountain I could never climb. In my desperation, I decided to call my parents. I had hesitated for days, typing and deleting messages dozens of times before finally pressing the call button. When my father's voice came through on the other end, my hands trembled as I tried to keep my tone steady. "Dad, I'm in trouble. I'm short on tuition this semester. I don't know where else to turn. Could you and Mom help me with part of it?" There was a brief silence, then my father sighed, the sound carrying more reproach than concern. He said, "Emma, you're smart, you'll figure it out. You've always been strong, you don't need us to worry about you. Chloe is the one who really needs support. Stop comparing yourself." I froze, speechless, clutching the phone. From the background, my mother added, "If it's that hard, take a semester off, work more, then go back. No one's forcing you to study nonstop." Those words cut into me like a blade. I wasn't asking for money to waste, or for new clothes, or a vacation. I was asking for a chance to continue my education, the only path I had to escape the cycle of being forgotten. Yet, even in my lowest moment, my parents made it clear their duty was to take care of Chloe first. With no other choice, I was forced to turn to the student bank to borrow $15,000. I remember that day vividly. Walking into the financial office, signing page after page, my hands shaking as I stared at the numbers. The staff member gave a dismissive smile and said, "Don't worry, plenty of students have to borrow." But to me, every digit felt like a stone pressing down on my chest. When I stepped outside, the winter wind cut sharp and cold, and I felt as if I had just chained myself to a debt that would follow me throughout my youth. That night, after finishing the loan paperwork, I sat in my thin-walled apartment, the wind whistling through the cracks in the door, a steaming packet of instant noodles serving as my only dinner. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media to distract myself from the heaviness pressing down on me when an image appeared on the screen that felt like a slap across my face. Chloe had just posted a new set of photos, a glittering candlelit dining room, a table overflowing with roses and wine, and at the center, Chloe in a silk dress, smiling brightly as she opened a box holding a sparkling Rolex watch. The caption read, "Best birthday ever. Thank you Mom and Dad for the most amazing gift. Number Rolex. Number spoiled, number blessed." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening in pain. A Rolex, an $8,000 watch. That amount would have covered the entire portion of tuition I was struggling to pay. While I had just signed loan papers for $15,000 with years of interest weighing on me, my parents had spent $8,000 on a luxury item for Chloe, just so she could flaunt it online. The unfairness burned so fiercely inside me I couldn't contain it. Tears spilled from my eyes, dropping onto the rough wooden table where I Saturday. I asked myself, had my efforts never meant anything? What had I done wrong to deserve this treatment? I achieved, I endured, I never demanded, and yet all I received was cold indifference. Meanwhile, Chloe failed, dropped out, stumbled, and still she was cherished like a treasure, savoring a luxurious life in Italy. Adorned with gifts so extravagant many people would never touch them in a lifetime. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, my father's words echoing in my head. "You're smart, figure it out yourself. Chloe needs us more." For the first time in my life, I felt the raw weight of betrayal. It was no longer the small wounds of being overlooked, but a direct stab to the heart, exposing the truth that in my parents' hearts, love was never meant to be shared equally. I was never the priority. I was only the shadow, the one expected to endure. I remember jolting upright, opening my laptop, and pouring out pages of journal entries just to keep myself from losing my mind. In every word, I released my pain and fury. Why must I take on debt just to have a chance? Why do I starve and scrape while my sister receives luxury watches? Why have you never once asked if I'm okay? I wrote until my hands ached, my eyes burned, and finally collapsed over the keyboard. Outside, the Boston wind still howled cold and sharp, while inside me, a hollow space widened endlessly. That was the moment I knew my parents' love for me was no longer something I could hope for. It had twisted into a kind of indifference, and that betrayal would haunt me forever. After the crushing blow of being denied help with tuition and forced into $15,000 more in debt, I swore to myself that I would never expect anything from them again. And yet, the human heart is weak, especially when faced with the milestones that mark a life. Graduation was drawing near, and within me flickered the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, this time they would show up differently. I had done everything to make that moment perfect, as if offering myself one small gift after 4 years of relentless struggle. I started saving every scrap of income I could. On late nights after tutoring, I slipped a few $20 bills into an envelope. At the cafe, even a $2 or $3 tip went straight into a glass jar on my desk. For more than 2 months, I collected, scraped, and stretched until I finally had enough to book a dinner table at a small Italian restaurant by the Boston Harbor, where warm golden lights reflected on the rippling water, creating a cozy and romantic glow. It wasn't the fanciest place, but to me, it represented a simple dream. To sit with my family, to share the joy of surviving 4 years of exhaustion, and to feel, just once, that we belonged together. I planned every detail as if it were a grand celebration. I printed invitations, even sketched a seating chart by hand, placing my father across from my mother, with Chloe and me on either side. I imagined us raising glasses of red wine, laughing about childhood memories, and for the first time in years, I would not have to play the role of the responsible eldest daughter. I would simply be a graduate, a daughter yearning for recognition and love. I even spent an afternoon at the flower shop near my dorm. I bought a bouquet of purple tulips, the flowers I had adored since childhood. No one ever asked what I wanted for my special day, so I bought them for myself. Holding the bouquet, I felt a small sense of comfort, as if I were quietly soothing my own heart. Tomorrow, things will be different, I whispered. I believed, if only once, my parents would come and smile at me. The night before the ceremony, after neatly arranging my gown and cap on the chair, I picked up my phone and typed a message in the family group chat. 9 a.m. tomorrow, main auditorium. Family seats are in row A, section D, seat 3. Afterward, we have a table reserved at the Italian restaurant by the harbor at 12:15. I truly hope everyone can come. Remember to bring a coat, it might be chilly. I really look forward to seeing you all. I reread the message several times, editing every punctuation mark, as though my carefulness might somehow convey my sincerity. Moments later, the scene icon appeared. I sat on my bed, my heart racing, waiting. But no reply came, no emoji, no confirmation, not a single word. The screen remained silent, leaving behind a heavy emptiness. I rested my hand on my forehead, trying to reassure myself. Maybe they want to surprise me, maybe they're preparing something I don't know about. That fragile hope was the only thread keeping me from falling into the abyss of disappointment. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I tossed and turned, my mind spinning through endless scenarios. I imagined walking out of the auditorium to see my father lifting a camera, recording every step I took. I pictured my mother holding a bouquet larger than the tulips I had bought for myself. I saw Chloe rushing into my arms as if we were truly close sisters. I replayed that moment dozens of times in my head, giving my heart another reason to believe. Around 2 in the morning, I sat up and opened the small notebook I used to capture my feelings. I wrote, "Tomorrow will be my day. No matter what happens, I deserve to be happy. Whether my parents come or not, I have walked this road with strength." I wrote those words, but deep inside, I still longed for the sight of those 3 seats filled when I turned my head in the crowded auditorium. Before going to bed, I hung my gown and cap neatly on the hook and placed my polished black shoes beneath them. The bouquet of purple tulips rested on the table, their gentle fragrance filling the tiny room. I looked around, and somehow the worn-down apartment seemed warmer, as though it too was waiting for a brighter tomorrow. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and promised myself I would smile as brightly as I could, no matter what happened. And yet, deep within me, a faint whisper lingered. Will they really come? Or am I just fooling myself again? I tried to push it away, clinging to that fragile hope, letting it lull me into a restless sleep. What I didn't know was that the next morning, those empty seats would once again stand as the cruelest proof of the truth I had denied for far too long. That morning, I woke up very early. Boston lay under a thin veil of mist, tiny droplets clinging to the window frame like shards of glass reflecting the pale light. I slipped into a simple navy blue dress, draped the graduation gown over my shoulders, and placed the square cap neatly on the table beside the bouquet of purple tulips I had bought for myself. Staring into the mirror, I whispered that I had to smile today. To smile as much as I could, because maybe my parents would surprise me, maybe things would finally be different. But deep in my chest, fear beat steadily, whispering the same question, those 3 seats, would they still be empty? When I arrived at the auditorium, the air buzzed with laughter and chatter. My classmates hurried past in their gowns, clutching flowers, collapsing into tearful embraces with their parents. Fathers and mothers climbed onto chairs just to get the best angle for a video of their child. I pushed my way through the crowd, making my way to Section A, Row D, Seat 3, the spot I had so carefully reserved for my family. And there it was, all of them empty. 3 front row seats, untouched, without the slightest trace that my parents had ever intended to be there. I stood frozen, clutching the tulips so tightly that sweat dampened my palms. My eyes scanned the crowd desperately for a familiar face. There was nothing, only cheers rising for someone else's moment. Then my name was called. I drew in a deep breath and walked onto the stage. My steps felt unbearably heavy, each one stretched into an eternity. The entire hall applauded, but the sound rang hollow, distant, foreign. There was no voice shouting, "Emma," from the family seats, no camera raised high to capture the moment. Only the cold, empty chairs stared back at me, like a wound that would never close. Just as I bowed my head to receive my diploma, the phone in the pocket of my gown vibrated. My heart jolted, a spark of hope flickering inside me. Maybe it was a message from Mom or Dad, saying they were running late. But when I sneaked a glance at the screen after stepping off the stage, my heart shattered into pieces. The notification was from Facebook. My mother had just posted new photos, golden sunlight spilling over a luxury yacht in the Caribbean, her arm linked with Chloe's as they stood on the deck. Chloe wore a flowing white maxi dress, her smile radiant as she raised a glittering cocktail. Beneath the photo, my mother's caption read, "So proud of our baby girl, enjoying life after exams. Number Caribbean, number family first." I froze. My fingers trembled, my eyes burned. Baby girl, had I ever been called that? While I was receiving my diploma after 4 years of crushing tuition and endless jobs, my parents had chosen that very moment to boast about their proud daughter on a lavish yacht. Not a single word of congratulations for me. Not a single sign that I even existed in their family's story. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, fighting to keep the tears from spilling in front of everyone. Forcing a brittle smile, I bowed to the faculty, then quietly stepped down from the stage. Surrounded by cheers and parents calling their children's names, I felt as if I had just performed in a play that meant nothing. The diploma in my hands felt heavy as stone, stripped of any triumph. It only reminded me that once again, I had been left behind. After the ceremony, while everyone hugged their families and posed for photos, I slipped away to a corner of the campus. I pulled out my phone and looked at that Facebook post one more time. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments congratulating Chloe. No one knew that at that very moment, her sister stood alone, clutching a bouquet she had bought for herself, her eyes swollen and red. Quietly, I deleted the app from my screen, because I knew if I kept looking, I wouldn't be able to hold back the scream building in my chest. I walked to the little Italian restaurant by the harbor. The manager had the table ready, crisp white linens, candles flickering warmly on the surface. When I told him my family wasn't coming, he gave me a look of pity. I forced a smile, apologized, and canceled the reservation. The deposit I had saved for 2 months was gone just like that. Stepping outside, the sea wind whipped across my face, carrying a salty sting that felt like the very tears I was forcing myself to swallow. Back in my apartment, I hung the gown and cap on the hook. They no longer looked like symbols of achievement, only lifeless decorations. I placed the diploma on the desk, staring at it as if it were just another piece of paper. I dropped the bouquet of tulips onto the chair, the petals wilting, mirroring the way I felt withered and drained. The tiny room seemed even smaller, suffocating under the weight of my silence. I sat down on the bed, covered my face with my hands, and for the first time in 4 years, I broke down and cried uncontrollably. Tears soaked my palms, ran down into my collar, but I had no strength left to wipe them away. Only one question circled endlessly in my mind. What did I do wrong? Why, even on the most important day of my life, did they still choose to abandon me? I had once believed that my sacrifices would be recognized, that one day my parents would finally see my efforts. But now, all that belief lay shattered like glass beneath my feet. That night, I curled up on my bed, my back turned to the window. The noise of the street outside still echoed faintly, but I could no longer hear it clearly. In the freezing silence of my apartment, I whispered to myself, maybe I never really had a family. And in that moment, I knew a chapter of my life had closed. Only the gown hanging quietly on the wall remained, a cruel reminder that my victories had never been enough to make them turn and see me. 3 days after graduation, when the pain inside me had barely begun to settle, my phone suddenly rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. A small part of me longed to believe she might apologize, that she would explain why they hadn't come to my ceremony. But when her voice came through, familiar yet cold, it extinguished every hope in an instant. "Emma," she said, as if nothing had happened. "Can you send another $700 to Chloe? We spent more than expected on the trip. Cruises are more expensive than you think." 1. I sat there in stunned silence, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. In my mind, images rushed back: the 3 empty seats in the auditorium, the trembling bouquet of tulips in my hands, the photo of Chloe smiling on the yacht. I swallowed hard, my voice catching in my throat as I said, "Mom, why? Why is it always me who has to pay? I don't have money. I had to borrow $15,000 just to cover tuition. I've been handling everything on my own. And Chloe, she's already been given everything. Why is it still me?" On the other end, my mother was silent for a few seconds, then sighed as if I were the selfish one. "Don't compare. You're stronger, more independent. You have a scholarship, a job. Chloe is fragile, sensitive. She needs more so she doesn't get hurt. You're the older sister, you're supposed to give way." Something inside me exploded, quiet but devastating. For years, I had clenched my teeth and endured, convincing myself that one day they would be fair. But those words were the final drop, overflowing the glass. My voice shook, rising higher than usual as I said, "No, Mom. I can't keep carrying the weight of this family forever. I need love too. I need care too. Why has no one ever asked if I'm okay? When will you love me simply because I'm your daughter, not because I know how to sacrifice?" In that moment, silence swallowed the line. A heavy, suffocating silence, so deep I could hear my own heart pounding. It felt like I had just committed a crime, daring to speak the truth, daring to ask for the love I should have had all along. Then my father's voice broke through, sharp and furious, every word pressed hard with anger. "Emma, the more you study, the more ungrateful you become. You compare yourself to your sister, you're selfish, you don't know how to sacrifice. We've already given you too much, and now you come back to blame us? If you want to live on your own, then go ahead. Don't call us again." I sat frozen, the phone trembling in my hands. Then I heard my mother's voice cut in, cold and biting. "That's right. If you want to separate yourself from this family, then don't come running back when things get hard." And just like that, the call ended, leaving only the hollow drone of the dial tone echoing in my ears. I sat there for a long time in the silence of my apartment, my heart feeling as though it had been ripped in two. They had just declared, in the bluntest way possible, that the love they gave me came with conditions. It only existed if I continued to sacrifice for my sister, to carry the weight, to remain silent. If I dared to speak up, if I dared to ask for even a shred of fairness, then I would be cut out of what they called family. Now, I buried my face in my hands as the tears poured out uncontrollably. But unlike before, this pain wasn't just about being abandoned, it was the shattering of my last illusion. I had believed that graduation would be the chance to heal, the moment to be recognized. But only days later, they had turned me once again into a stranger. That night, I opened the small notebook I had kept since my first day at college. My hand trembled as I wrote. "Today, my parents said if I want to live on my own, then don't call again. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's time I truly live on my own. No more waiting, no more pleading. The unconditional love I hoped for from them may never exist." When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it on the desk beside my diploma, still lying there unframed. I looked around the tiny room and let out a long sigh. In the darkness, I realized a bitter truth. Sometimes, rebellion doesn't bring change, it only exposes more clearly the distance that has always been there. And I, Emma Hart, had officially been erased from the embrace of my own blood family. After that painful call with my parents, I drifted through several days in a hollow state. I still went to work, still tutored, still lived like a machine, but my mind felt weighted down, as if someone had tied a stone to my chest and dragged me under. I needed a place to breathe, a place where I didn't have to pretend I was fine. So that weekend, I decided to take a bus to Cape Cod, where my grandparents lived in a small wooden house tucked beneath the shadows of old pine trees. It was the only place left where I still felt some sense of peace. When I stepped off the bus, the salty sea wind brushed against my face. I saw my grandmother waiting in her worn beige sweater, her frame small but her eyes still bright. She opened her arms and pulled me close, holding me as if she never wanted to let go. "Emma, you've grown so thin," she whispered. And there was my grandfather, leaning on his cane at the porch. The moment he saw me, he folded his newspaper quickly and broke into a gentle smile. In that instant, I almost cried, because it had been so long since I felt like someone was truly glad to see me come home. That evening, we gathered around the dinner table. Grandma cooked all the familiar dishes: roasted salmon, creamy corn chowder, and the homemade bread I had always loved as a child. The warmth from the kitchen spread through the house, chasing away the coldness I had been carrying inside. We ate and talked about simple things: new neighbors who had moved in, how beautifully the garden flowers were blooming this season. But as the meal drew to an end, Grandma set her spoon down and looked at me for a long moment. "Emma," she said softly, "I heard about your graduation. Why didn't your parents come? What happened, my dear?" I froze, my chest tightening. For a few seconds, I thought about lying the way I always had, saying my parents were busy, that they had sent their congratulations from afar. But this time, I couldn't. My throat felt as if it were closing, but I drew a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about the 3 empty seats in the auditorium, about the photo of Chloe beaming on the yacht, about the phone call afterward where my parents only asked me for more money for her. I told them about the $15,000 loan I had just taken out, and about the years of grinding work I had endured to cover my expenses. My voice shook, but I forced myself not to break down. My grandparents sat in stunned silence. My grandfather looked at me, his aged eyes flashing with a rare anger. "Emma, you said you had to take on debt, but we've been sending your parents $1,500 every month for years to help cover tuition for both of you. Could it be?" He stopped mid-sentence, as if he couldn't bear to finish the thought. I went numb. His words pierced me like a knife. $1,500 every month, that amount would have been enough to keep me from borrowing a cent, enough to spare me from countless nights working myself to exhaustion. Yet all I ever heard was, "You're strong, figure it out yourself." My grandmother placed a trembling hand on my shoulder, her eyes brimming with tears. "We thought your parents were using that money to support you both equally." I never imagined. Her voice broke, unable to go on. I lowered my gaze to the table, biting hard on my lip to hold back the flood of tears. In my mind, one question pounded relentlessly. Where had that money gone? But I didn't need anyone to answer. The truth was glaring. Every dollar had gone straight into Chloe's life, her trips, her tuition in Florence, her luxury gifts like the Rolex. And me? I was the independent child, the one left to survive without a single penny of it. My grandfather brought his hand down lightly on the table, his voice trembling with anger. "From now on, we won't be sending your parents another cent. They've betrayed our trust. Emma, from this day forward, that money will go directly to you. Not because you're weak, but because you deserve to be supported just like any grandchild would." I lifted my head, tears blurring my vision as I looked at them. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt recognized, not for my achievements, not for my sacrifices, but simply for being me. That night, I lay in the small attic room of my grandparents' house. The old wooden ceiling carried the faint scent of pine, and the sound of the ocean breeze drifted through the window. I tossed and turned for a long time, thinking back over all the years I had fought to survive, never knowing that help had been so close. Yet, instead of receiving support, I had been forced into debt so that Chloe could live like a princess. The pain was both bitter and strangely freeing. Because at least now, I understood that my parents' neglect was not normal, it was a betrayal. And I also understood that I was no longer alone. The next morning, as I was preparing to leave, My grandfather pressed an envelope into my hand. I opened it and saw a check for $5,000. Shocked, I stammered, "Grandma, Grandpa, I can't accept this." But my grandfather cut me off gently. "Emma, this isn't charity, it's compensation for what you should have received long ago. Use it to pay down some of your debt, and remember you're not alone." My grandmother smiled warmly, clasping my hand. "You don't have to pretend to be strong anymore. Here, you'll always be our little granddaughter who deserves to be loved." Oh. I hugged them tightly, feeling as though for the first time in my life I had touched something real true family. On the bus ride back to Boston, I gazed out the window, and a new determination welled up inside me. If my parents had chosen betrayal, then I would no longer keep silent. I would live my own life, and for the first time, I would walk forward without the illusion of their love weighing me down. In one sense, I had lost a family. But in another, I had finally found one, a place where my very existence was enough to be loved. A week after my visit to Cape Cod, just as I finished my evening shift at the cafe, my phone suddenly buzzed. My father's name lit up on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. His voice came crashing through immediately, sharp and thunderous. "Emma, you've destroyed this family. Your grandparents turned against us because of you. You made up lies, you twisted everything to make them believe. Are you proud of yourself for humiliating your own parents?" I sank into a plastic chair in the staff break room, sat upright, and took a deep breath. My heart was racing, but my voice came out steady, almost unnaturally calm. I didn't make up anything. I simply stopped being silent. I told the truth you've tried to hide for years. On the other end, I heard my mother cut in, her voice shrill with fury. "You ungrateful girl. We raised you, we sacrificed so much for you, and now you stab your own family in the back. You are nothing but a traitor." I let out a small laugh, not bitter, but relieved because at last I had the courage to say what I truly thought. "No, I'm not a traitor, I'm simply refusing to live inside a lie. I chose to stand on the side of truth, and if the truth makes you uncomfortable, then that's not my fault." A heavy silence stretched across the line. Then my father roared. "From this moment on, you are no longer our daughter." The call ended with the cold click of disconnection, leaving only the hollow tone echoing in my ear. A few days later, while I was tutoring a student, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my parents, it was my grandparents' lawyer. His voice was calm but firm. "Miss Hart, I'm calling to inform you that your grandparents have officially changed all legal documents. The entire education fund, along with the Cape Cod vacation home valued at approximately $400,000, will now be transferred into your name. They asked me to emphasize that this is not a reward, but rather the restoration of fairness that should have existed." I went still, my ears buzzing. I had never expected inheritance, never asked for anything material. Yet the feeling of being trusted, of finally being acknowledged, blurred my eyes with tears. It didn't take long for the news to reach my parents. The very next day, my phone rang again. This time, both of them shouted into my ear. My father thundered, "You've stolen everything that belonged to this family. You colluded with your grandparents to push us aside. You traitor." My mother followed, her voice shaking with rage. "You will pay for this. Don't think your grandparents will protect you forever. When they're gone, you'll see you'll be left with nothing." I stayed silent for a moment, then answered calmly. "If my grandparents pass away, I will still have the memory that, at least once in my life, someone truly saw me. And what about you? You will forever be the parents who chose to abandon me on the most important day of my life. I didn't steal anything, I only received what was always meant for me. It was you who betrayed their trust, not me." On the other end, I heard chaos, my father's ragged breathing, his fury spilling out in broken gasps. He roared, "You don't deserve to be part of this bloodline. You ungrateful child." I tilted my head slightly, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "No, Dad. I'm not ungrateful. I'm simply grateful to the people who truly love me." and you are not among them." I ended the call, and for the first time, I felt no regret, no trembling, only a stillness spreading through my entire body. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, my diploma and the lawyer's letter laid out in front of me. I thought about the road I had walked, the meager birthday cakes, the countless times I was pushed aside, the moment I collapsed in class from exhaustion. I had waited, I had hoped, I had stayed silent for far too long. And now, finally, I had broken free of those chains. I knew this severance could never be mended, but I also understood that some ties must be cut in order to truly live. Inside me, there was no longer hatred, but a new determination. I would use the money my grandparents had entrusted to me not to boast or retaliate, but to free myself from debt and to build the independent life I had always dreamed of. I would live freely, without needing validation from people who had never intended to give it. And when I thought of my parents calling me a traitor, I simply smiled. Because deep down, I knew the truth. Betrayal wasn't when I spoke out. Betrayal was when they chose to turn their backs on their own daughter. That night, I hung my diploma on the wall, right beside the lawyer's letter. I looked at them, then at the mirror, and saw a new Emma staring back. No longer the daughter desperate for affection from those who would never give it, but a woman who had learned how to stand on her own. And for the first time in years, I whispered without trembling, "I am free of them. I am free." How? After days torn between the fury of my parents and the shelter of my grandparents' embrace, I knew I had to leave Boston. That city held too many painful memories, from the nights I collapsed over my desk in a freezing apartment to the graduation ceremony with 3 empty chairs seared into my mind. I needed a fresh start, a city wide enough to hold the unfinished dreams I carried. So I moved to New York City. New York greeted me with endless car horns, neon lights stretching into the sky, and a rhythm so fast no one had time to look back at another person's past. I rented a tiny apartment in Queens, just big enough for a bed, a desk, and a few bookshelves. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't grand, but I called it home with a quiet pride. Because everything inside those walls was mine alone, not hand-me-downs, not leftovers, not conditional gifts, but the result of my own effort. I soon landed a job at a data analytics firm in Manhattan. It was a young startup, buzzing with energy, where every voice was heard, no matter where you came from. On my first day in the office, I sat before the screen filled with lines of code and massive data tables, my heart pounding with excitement. And in that moment, I realized this was the path I had fought so hard to carve over the last 4 years. Every late-night cafe shift, every article I typed in the dark, every tip I tucked away, all of it had led me here. In New York, I no longer had to prove my worth to anyone. No more parents comparing me to Chloe, no more warnings not to show off your achievements, you'll make your sister feel bad. I had colleagues, now people who measured me by my actual abilities. And for the first time, I felt the relief of being recognized for what I truly earned. I was no longer a shadow forced to shrink into silence. I stood in the light on my own, without needing anyone's permission. Many nights, sitting by the window watching the city lights flicker, I thought back to the old days. I saw the 16-year-old Emma scolded for winning an award without thinking of her sister. I saw the 21-year-old Emma faint in class from exhaustion, then get up alone because no one cared. I saw the 23-year-old Emma clutching purple tulips in an auditorium where 3 seats sat empty. Each of those versions of me had been a shadow, living quietly so as not to upset anyone. But now, I finally understood, it was the silence that made me disappear from their eyes. It was the courage to speak, to confront, to sever ties that was what saved me. My parents may still see me as a traitor, and Chloe may still live wrapped in their indulgence, but none of that matters anymore. I chose truth. And that truth, though painful, has become the wings that carried me out of the invisible cage I had lived in for so long. In telling this story, I don't seek pity. I want to share a message with anyone listening. Love is not a reward for the one who endures the most. Love should never be rationed out according to who is weaker or more fragile. Every child deserves to be loved equally, no matter how strong or independent they appear. Strength should never be an excuse for neglect. If you grew up in a family that always demanded you give way, that always pushed you aside so others could shine, remember this. You are not wrong for wanting to be seen, for longing to be acknowledged. If you were ever called ungrateful simply because you dared to speak, understand that you are only saving yourself from being erased. And if the day comes when you must cut ties in order to survive, know this: walking away is not always a loss. Sometimes, it is the beginning of a real life. I, Emma Hart, lost my family by blood, but I found myself. I no longer wait for love from those who were never willing to give it. I have learned how to love myself and how to build a new family, friends, colleagues, people who truly see me. On the last night of my first week working in New York, I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, the wind tossing my hair as I looked out at the glowing skyline. I whispered, "I am no longer a shadow." And in the endless noise of the city, I heard clearly the voice inside me, the voice I had buried for so many years. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to live. And I knew this was only the beginning.